1. So I'm a bigger girl, 5'11", and a bit of a chunky monkey. I'm not obese or overly fat, but I have a few rolls from the bakery. I was in a pub I always go to, Brogue, Cork City, Ireland. And I was with a bunch of my friends. We are all girls and we're having a laugh. It was like 10:30 p.m. I had like 2 pints and was starting to get a buzz. I was standing by a door out to the smoking area when a guy passed behind me and touched me. Now, I'm a person who hovers a hand behind people if I am cutting through a crowd. I tap them lightly on the back if they don't see me trying to cut through, and I always say, "Sorry there, just coming through." I usually get the "oh sorry" and they move. So when I felt a hand on my waist or back, I thought this guy was just brushing past and put a hand there to say excuse me. I turned and looked to see if I was majorly blocking the way to the door. That's when things got weird. This guy squeezed my waist, like half pinching my waist. I'm like, he's drunk. But he continues past me out to the smoking area, and I see he is fine. No dazed look or walking funny. So the night goes on and I get squeezed and pinched 2 more times by the same guy. I come to the conclusion that he's kind of feeling me up. He's not touching my ass or anywhere else, just my waist. It's like he's testing it, feeling how hard or soft it is. He comes out of nowhere and does it, and then he's gone before I can turn and confront him. I realize a few things after that second squeeze. He is alone and basically circling me and my friends, coming near our group then looping back out to the smoking area. I clearly know what he looks like by the 3rd squeeze. I catch him out of the corner of my eye, and I'd move especially after the 2nd squeeze because it showed he knew what he was doing and he was targeting me. Out of his way or to get another body between me and him. My body language is "stop touching me, I'm not reacting to what you're doing, fuck off." I don't tell my friends because I don't want to ruin the night. I am also the tallest of the group and I stopped drinking the minute the 2nd squeeze and lurking happened. It would be a different thing if he was doing it to the smallest or drunkest girl in the group. He can't just pick me up and carry me away. Lights come on, and it's home time. In hindsight, I should have told the manager at the time, he's a friend of mine, and he would have let us stay behind for a few minutes and let that guy wander off. But I was with a group of 5 to 6 girls, and they all grabbed their stuff and we were out in a second. If you know the pub and the area of Cork City, we ended up outside Hillbillies, the fountain. If you don't, we literally came out of this place and turned right, crossed a road, and we were in this big open space. I stood by the taxi rank and was stoic, and not talking and laughing like my friends were. Why? Because the guy had followed us, on his own, out to this area. Usually this place is flooded with people on a night out, but that night it was dead quiet. He didn't walk on away, he stood hovering. I'm by the taxi rank and he's a good 20 to 30 feet by Hillbillies, a fast food place. I decide to tell my friends that he has been following us and he has been touching me. My friends turn to look and, of course, they all go over and start talking to him. I stay by the taxi rank, and would happily jump into a taxi on my own and leave them there, rather than go over and entertain him. He's far away, but I can tell he's staring at me. One of my friends come back and it's like, "What's wrong?" They obviously weren't listening when I told them about him. I tell her the story and she's like, "Oh Christ, okay." The rest of the gang come back, they are pretty drunk. And one of my friends is like, "He's up from Kerry from college and he invited us back to his house for a house party." I go, no, he's a creep, and I have to retell the story. He is still hovering over across the way, and he's just staring. I managed to stop my friends actually confronting him, and get them into a taxi, and home we went. When I got home, I got into a scalding hot shower. I actually had red marks on my waist from his hands. That's how hard he was squeezing. I don't know if he would have come up to me if I was on my own, or if he thought I was drunk because of how my friends were. Turns out I'm not easy prey. I have had lads look at me weird when I'm out, but nobody has ever put their hands on me or kept up things when I'm obviously not interested. Keep an eye out when you're out, lads and lassies. You never know if a chubby chaser is on your tail. 2. For context, I live in Switzerland at the foot of the Jura Mountains. The name Jura comes from the Celtic word for forest, which is fitting considering almost the entirety of the mountain range is covered in woods and pastures, unlike the nearby Alps, for example, due to altitude. It has a rich history of legends and spirituality, probably due to the variety of cultures that have inhabited the region throughout history, Celts, Romans, etc. Now I must emphasize that this story is more on the side of an interesting and creepy-ish encounter than really scary or threatening, at least in my view. Growing up, I just saw the Jura as a cool place to explore and admire, go camping and hiking, etc. As I got older, I realized that there was a certain spiritual element to the region, whether that be as mundane as the abundance of churches, to monasteries from the 12th century, to more small-scale and personal manifestations of spirituality, which is what I want to touch on. A few years ago, during bike rides or hikes, I started seeing things like fabrics hung in trees and clearly man-made rock formations. I didn't really think much of it since I assumed it was kids or maybe scout activities. However, as I paid more attention, I realized that these things had more meaning behind them than I had initially thought. Large spiral rock formations at mountain peaks, stone patterns, connected trees in a wheel shape in the middle of the woods, pebble markings in the shape of symbols, runes, old world letters, markings in trees, etc. This was a little striking, admittedly, and a little creepy considering how foreign and unusual it seemed to me. Later on, I understood more clearly what this was, or at least what some of it was. I started seeing remains of what I now know to be sweat lodges. I don't claim to be very knowledgeable on this, but these appear to be related to the general field of spirituality and shamanism, perhaps of Native American origin. Eventually, I saw a couple of these ceremonies in the act. The way I did was that during bike rides I would see either a few cars with feather, dreamcatcher, bead rear view mirror decorations, parked seemingly in the middle of nowhere, or see fabrics tied to trees by the road, and then hear noises further up into the woods. I'm curious, so I had to investigate. The first time I saw a group of people building a sweat lodge, collecting wood, etc. It seemed as though they made a makeshift bed nearby where a couple of people would take naps and rotate. I'm assuming so that they'd be less tired of the nighttime ceremony. I didn't want to bother them, so I kept a certain distance, but eventually I ran into one of them collecting wood. I greeted him normally in French, and he quietly and politely did the same. He didn't look or sound like a native Swiss, whereas the rest of the group did from distance, so I've always just assumed that he was maybe their guide or something, also considering he was wearing these sort of stereotypical baggy maroon clothes. The second time, I'm not sure it was the same people, but it was a similar sight in a different place. The part that bothered me a bit was that there were a few young kids with them. For those who don't know about sweat lodge ceremonies at all, they're quite intense and can be unsafe for adults, let alone small children. The ceremony involves making a hut with a pit inside and a fire pit outside of it. Basically, they put large stones on the exterior fire, heat them up as much as possible, then transport them to the indoor pit. And then I guess throw water on it and create intense steam. This includes tobacco baggies and herbs, as well as, I believe, sometimes some form of drugs. Whether or not there were drugs, the heat and the steam has led to deaths and is a draining experience. And I hope the kids weren't there for that. The day after, I checked on the place and walked around the structure out of interest. There was lots of interesting stuff like tobacco baggies hanging from the structure, rock formations creating unknown symbols, markings in trees, and the creepiest of all, a fairly large piece of bone about the size of a fist, balanced on a tree stump. So I won't quite say let's not meet, yet. But it was certainly a fascinating encounter, and a new aspect of the area that I simply wasn't aware of before. 3. I've had my fair share of creepy people throughout my life. Bucharest is a city where things like this rarely happen. So just take it from me, I had bad luck. First of all, let me just say that I'm not your average scaredy-cat dude who legs it when someone stares at them for too long, like I've seen some posters here do. I'm also not gonna hide under my bed if my house gets broken into. You'd better believe I'll stomp their asses with no regards for my own safety. Keyboard warrioring aside, there's been a few moments that I've had with total strangers that have been scarring. Genuinely terrifying moments. I'm going to be talking about the most fucked up situation that I have ever been in my life. And hope to God out there that it never happens again. The incident happened 4 years ago before New Year's Eve. I was 18 at the time, and had finished high school in summer. And with no activity and nothing else to do, I decided to look for something I could do part-time with my limited skill set and talents. The only things I was remotely good at was playing video games and boxing. My mom found out this casting job in a newspaper article, back when she didn't know how to browse the internet, and she called and set up a meeting without really talking to me about it. I decided to play along since I was searching for something anyway, and casting in some shows seemed like an awesome choice. I am 6'1" and I was skinny at the time, so I figured they could make me wear stuff like a clothing model. Needless to say, my naivete got the best of me, and I didn't realize things did not work that way. I went to the casting studio and the place was a total wreck. It was in some run-down building at the edge of the city. No windows, the bricks in the wall were cracked, and the withering vegetation was getting a hold of the whole place. It was also strange that there were no people around, but I figured, since this is the city's edge and all, then it should be a normal sight. I realized there was no front door, so I went down some stairway on the far end of the building, which led me to a rotted wooden door. There was no handle or anything, so I didn't even know if I should push or try to pull it with the tip of my fingers somehow. I decided that it must be the wrong place, so I called their number, which my mom provided me with, and somebody answered. It was, well, she said she was a woman, but I thought she was a man at first. She had such a low-pitched voice. She was very sweet and patient with me, and told me that this was indeed the building I should go into, that I should try to hold the door and push it up a bit, and then pull it towards me slowly, so it wouldn't break from the hinges, and to not be afraid when I come inside, because it's going to be pitch black. Apparently there's no electricity in that area, so I just need to go forward until I feel another door, and that's going to take me to another hallway, which is completely lit up, and will take me to their office. Now hold up. What kind of insane dumbass do you think I am to do this? I watched too many horror movies to know this is all kinds of bad. The lady on the other side told me a brief explanation of why the office is like this. Apparently, this was an apartment complex built in the 60s, but it got really wrecked after the '77 earthquake, which killed quite a few people because some of the pillars on the second floor were unstable beforehand. So they had to close it, and no one's really done anything with it since. Since this casting company's budget was really low, they couldn't afford to have a nice-looking office, and to be in a good-looking place, or at least a safe one. If you're having trouble with the logic here, these were her words, not mine. One thing I found sketchy is that somewhere in this conversation, she said, "You're alone, yeah?" I thought it was a bit strange, as if she could see me somehow. Her story seemed legit, though. I closed the call, opened the rotting door, and sure enough, darkness. I should point out that when I pulled the door to me, that there was a chair in front of the door, probably to block it from collapsing inwards, as it apparently swung both ways because of its state of decay. I activated my phone flashlight to look around, and it was really empty. Just a few chairs in a corner, and a white, ragged and dirty-looking tarp on the ground next to them. The door in the front had the same aspect of rotting wood, I figured that they would at least renovate that one to make it look more appealing. I pushed the door gently, and it opens with a very loud creak. I think I should have pulled it, but this one had no handle as well. Everything was still dark. I started questioning the system that they use, and the fact that they're not professional. The lady told me that the hallway would be lit up, yet it wasn't. With my phone flashlight still on, I scanned the room for clues as to where the office might be. I know how this must seem to you, the reader. How did I not pick up on this incredibly sketchy situation? I am just used to this. In the past, me and my parents didn't have light sources in our backyard, so whenever I need to get something from the pantry, which also did not have a light source, I would do so in total darkness. This whole thing was getting on my nerves, so I deactivated my flashlight and decided to call the number again. As soon as I put my phone to my ear, and the light it emitted went out, I heard a loud creak behind me, the sound of the rotting door that I pushed out earlier getting put back into place. I jumped at the sound and let out a sharp yell. I instinctively put my phone out, but the light the dial screen was letting out was too weak to see in front of me. "Hello?" I asked in a worried voice. No response. But in a second I could hear the dial tone from my phone, and I hear a Nokia ringtone, the piano one, from the other side of the room where the door had been closed. I stay silent for a moment, and the ringing stops. I have never been more horrified in my life. I crouched down and started moving along the wall to my left as quickly and quietly as possible. I hear the very quiet footsteps coming from my right, but I couldn't tell if they were coming toward me. I formulated a very basic escape plan in an instant. I had a general idea of where the door was, and the footsteps seemed to be directionless. I took 2 coins of 50 baht out of my back pocket and threw them at the corner on the other side of the room, and then fucking booked it. I pushed on the edge of the door at first because I ran away too fast and I had no idea where the door was exactly, and then pushed against it to get out of the room. I tripped because I expected no resistance, yet a chair was blocking the other side. I heard scampered footsteps behind me and slight grunts. I get up and run away in the dark room, with no regards to what I may hit on my path. I just knew the exit would be right in front of me. Sure enough, I hit another chair on the way, the one that I found blocking the door at the entrance, and it propelled me so hard that I bashed the door and knocked it out of its hinges. I opened my eyes and I was outside, so my first instinct was screaming for help at the top of my lungs. I look to the building and I finally see him. A tall, overweight man, probably around 300 pounds, carrying a cloth in one of his hands. He was wearing a white tank top and jeans or sweatpants. I couldn't really be bothered to notice at the time. The expression on his face was one of pure anger. I scampered about and ran up the stairs as fast as I could, and turned right to go into town. I ran for about 3 or 4 minutes at full speed, not stopping for anything, until I finally reached the main street and see a lot of cars. I was still in a panicked state, so I beelined it for the nearest taxi and told him to take me the fuck home. I called my mom when I was halfway home and told her everything that had just happened. She felt sick to her stomach and started crying that she put me in a situation that I might have died. Later that day I filed a report to our nearest police station, and they sent a dispatch there. We were informed that they found traces of a few blunts, which had cannabis sativa and a double-edged razor on the ground. They also found a broken Nokia flip phone in the dirt outside. My parents told the police that if they found out anything else, to please contact them. This has left me with some serious issues, as I now feel very anxious whenever I go to a job interview. I only feel relatively safe if the location is in a very public place, and the interview is at rush hour. One man did this to me. So kids, stay safe. And remember, your martial arts training doesn't mean shit when you're scared shitless. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 264. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'll apologise if there was any whiffing on the stories. It's quite far away, the dog that's making the noise, so I don't think there'll be too much, if any. But if I missed anything, that's the reason. Well, dogs are gonna whiff. What are you gonna do, eh? Okay, and with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.